My husband kissed another woman, right in front of me, though he never noticed I was standing there. I thought my marriage was over in that single moment, standing frozen on that sidewalk with my heart hammering against my ribs. I had no idea that was only the beginning of everything I would eventually learn. My name is Emma Collins. I'm 34 years old, an interior designer with a small but steady client list I've built over the past decade, and I've been married to my husband for 11 years. We have a son together, Noah, who just turned 8, a bright, energetic boy who inherited his father's easy charm and my stubborn attention to detail. For most of our marriage, I would have told you without hesitation that Daniel and I had built something solid, something worth all the compromises and quiet sacrifices that come with committing your life to another person. Daniel Collins is 37, a successful architect whose firm has grown steadily over the years, taking on increasingly high-profile commercial projects across the city. I met him when I was still finishing my design degree, and I remember being struck, even then, by the way he talked about buildings, not just as structures but as spaces meant to hold people's lives. I fell in love with that vision of him, the careful, thoughtful man who cared as much about how a space made someone feel as he did about the technical precision of the blueprints. We built our life together on that foundation, or so I believed for over a decade. The last several months before everything unraveled, I noticed small changes in Daniel that I tried, in the way people often do when they're afraid of what an honest answer might reveal, to explain away. He started staying late at the office more often than usual, sometimes not coming home until well after Noah had gone to bed. His phone, which used to sit openly on the kitchen counter while he cooked dinner or helped with homework, started disappearing into his jacket pocket the moment he walked through the door, and he began locking it with a passcode he'd never bothered with before. He started taking business trips more frequently, sometimes with barely a day's notice, vague explanations about client meetings in other cities that never quite lined up cleanly when I thought about them too carefully. And then there were the gifts. Daniel had never been an extravagant gift giver during our marriage, practical and thoughtful more than lavish, which made it all the stranger when he started coming home with expensive jewelry for me, a designer handbag I never asked for, a weekend getaway he booked without discussing it first. I told myself, in the quiet, hopeful way you do when you desperately want to believe the best about someone you love, that maybe he was simply feeling grateful. Maybe work stress was making him want to spoil me a little more than usual. I didn't let myself consider, not seriously, not yet, that the gifts might be something else entirely, a kind of quiet guilt dressed up as generosity. The day everything changed started as an ordinary Tuesday. I had a meeting downtown with a client who wanted to discuss renovation plans for a restaurant, and afterward, I decided to walk a few blocks to pick up coffee before heading to my car. That's when I saw him, standing near the entrance of an upscale restaurant I recognized immediately as one of Daniel's favorites for client dinners, though it was well past any typical lunch meeting hour. He wasn't alone. Standing close beside him was a woman, younger than me by several years, strikingly beautiful in the effortless way that always seems unfair somehow, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders as she laughed at something he'd said. I stopped walking. I told myself for one brief, desperate second that this could be a colleague, a client, someone entirely innocent standing a little too close simply because that's how some people are. And then Daniel reached out, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her, not the quick, casual kiss of friendly familiarity, but something slow and deliberate, something unmistakably intimate. My whole body went cold standing there on that sidewalk. I watched, frozen, as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box, handing it to her with a soft smile I recognized instantly. The same smile he used to give me early in our relationship, back when everything between us still felt new and carefully tended. I didn't need to see what was inside that box to feel the ground shift beneath me. Something about its size, its shape, the careful way he presented it to her, told me exactly what I was looking at. A ring. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, and then I turned and walked back to my car without either of them ever noticing I had been there at all. I didn't call him that night demanding answers. I didn't confront him the moment he walked through our front door, smiling, kissing our son's forehead, asking about my day like it was any other evening. Something in me, some instinct I still don't fully understand, told me to stay quiet, to gather myself, to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with before I did anything that couldn't be undone. I smiled back at him that night. I made dinner. I put Noah to bed and read him his favorite story, and later, lying beside Daniel in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and began methodically, to plan what I would do next. Within a few days, I had hired a private investigator, a quiet, professional woman named Renee who came highly recommended by a friend who had unfortunately needed similar services a few years earlier. I gave her everything I knew: Daniel's schedule, the restaurant where I'd seen him, the description of the woman he'd been with. I told myself I needed proof, not for any legal reason necessarily, but because some deep, wounded part of me needed to see the full truth laid out in front of me before I could accept it as real. The photographs Renee brought back to me 2 weeks later confirmed everything I feared and more. There were pictures of Daniel and this woman, whose name I learned was Claire, on what appeared to be a weekend trip to the coast, the exact weekend he'd told me he was attending an architecture conference in another state. There were photos of them walking hand in hand through a park near her apartment, sitting close together at intimate dinners, saying goodbye with lingering embraces outside her building late at night. It didn't look like a fling, a moment of weakness born from midlife restlessness. It looked like an entire relationship, carefully maintained alongside the one I thought we were building together, complete with its own rhythms and routines and, apparently, its own promises. I filed for divorce quietly, consulting a lawyer my sister recommended, someone experienced and discreet who helped me understand exactly what steps I needed to take to protect myself and Noah through the process. I didn't tell Daniel what I knew. I continued going through the motions of our daily life, cooking dinner, helping with Noah's homework, sleeping beside a man I now understood to be living an entirely separate existence I knew almost nothing about. It was without question one of the strangest, most painful periods of my life, carrying that knowledge silently while pretending, for the sake of stability, for the sake of choosing the right moment, that nothing had changed. The day I finally intended to hand him the divorce papers arrived on a quiet Saturday afternoon, while Noah was at a friend's birthday party. I had the documents sitting on the kitchen counter, ready, my hands steady in a way that surprised me given how much I was shaking on the inside. And then, just before Daniel was expected home, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a woman standing on my porch, and it took me a moment to place her, though I recognized her almost immediately from Renee's photographs. Claire. She looked nervous, her hands twisting together in front of her, and before I could say anything at all, she started speaking, her voice trembling with something that sounded, unmistakably, like genuine distress. "I'm sorry," she said. "He told me he was divorced." I stood in that doorway feeling the entire foundation of what I thought I understood shift again, this time in a direction I never expected. I invited her in, more out of stunned instinct than any conscious decision, and over the next hour, sitting across from each other at my kitchen table, Claire and I pieced together a story that neither of us had fully understood on our own. Daniel had told her, from the very beginning of their relationship nearly 2 years earlier, that his marriage had ended long before they met, that he and I were simply cohabiting temporarily for Noah's sake while finalizing arrangements, that the ring he'd shown her, the one I'd seen him hand over outside that restaurant, was meant for her, a promise of the future he claimed he was building once our supposed divorce was finally settled. He had been living an elaborate double life for years, not months as I'd assumed, but years, carefully maintaining 2 separate relationships, 2 separate sets of promises, 2 women who each believed, in their own way, that they understood the full truth of who he was and what he wanted. Claire pulled out her phone and showed me messages, dates, photographs from trips I recognized as ones he'd told me were solo business travel. We compared timelines, cross-referencing his supposed work trips with the moments he'd apparently been with her, and slowly, methodically, the entire architecture of his deception revealed itself to both of us. I want to say I felt anger toward Claire in that moment, the kind of anger women are sometimes expected to direct at the other woman rather than at the man who deceived them both, but I didn't feel that at all. Sitting across from her, watching her hands shake as she scrolled through years of messages from a man who had lied to her just as thoroughly as he'd lied to me, I felt something closer to solidarity. We had both been careful, thoughtful people who trusted someone who had built an entire second life on the foundation of our trust. Neither of us had done anything wrong except believe him. Daniel came home about an hour after Claire arrived, walking into his kitchen to find the 2 women he'd been deceiving sitting together at the table, documents and phone records spread out between us, our faces set with the particular calm that comes only after shock has fully burned away. I watched the color drain from his face as he understood, in an instant, exactly what had happened, exactly how thoroughly his careful construction had collapsed. He tried to explain, of course, stumbling through justifications that grew increasingly hollow the longer he spoke, but there was nothing left to explain that either of us hadn't already pieced together ourselves. I slid the divorce papers across the counter toward him, and this time, I didn't feel the need to say very much at all. I simply looked at him, this man I had loved for over a decade, the father of my son, and told him something I had been quietly composing in my mind for days without even realizing it. "You didn't betray one woman," I said. "You betrayed everyone who trusted you." I watched those words land, watched something crumble in his expression that I almost felt sorry for, before I reminded myself that pity was not mine to give him anymore. I signed my portion of the documents right there at the counter, calmly, without tears, without raising my voice, and Claire, still sitting quietly nearby, did the same with whatever remained of whatever future she'd believed they were building together. In the weeks that followed, Claire and I stayed in touch, an unlikely friendship born from shared betrayal that neither of us expected but both, in our own ways, needed. We helped each other untangle the specific lies Daniel had told each of us, comparing notes that gave both of us a clearer, fuller picture of exactly how deep his deception had run. There was a strange comfort in that shared understanding, in not having to carry the full weight of what happened alone. I moved forward slowly, rebuilding my life around Noah, around my work, around the quiet, steady process of learning to trust my own judgment again after discovering how thoroughly it had been deceived. Some days were harder than others. Some days I found myself replaying every small sign I'd missed over those final months, wondering how I hadn't seen the full picture sooner. But mostly, I found a strange kind of peace in the honesty that followed the wreckage, in knowing exactly what had happened rather than living inside a comfortable illusion that would have eventually collapsed anyway. Lies can build two lives running parallel to each other for years, each one carefully maintained, each one convincing enough to sustain real love, real trust, real hope for a future. But the truth, when it finally arrives, destroys them both at once, indifferent to how carefully they were constructed or how much anyone involved believed in what they thought they had. Could you ever forgive a betrayal like this, one that reaches far beyond a single broken promise into the very foundation of everything you believed to be true?